Yeah, I was saying this one, right? This is active.
So welcome everyone. Welcome to the World Trade Organization and to room S1 more specifically. Padded walls and almost no natural light. This is the WTO's weatherproof bunker. Now, I wanted to start this introduction with some words, with a bit of poetry from William Wordsworth. I wandered lonely as a cloud that floats high over vales and hills, when all at once I saw a crowd. I think that we can all agree that William Wordsworth wouldn't have seen much out of these skylights and probably wouldn't have had the inspiration for his poetry. Fortunately, these skylights are now weatherproof. Otherwise, I think the lyrics of B.J. Thomas might be more appropriate. And those lyrics are, raindrops keep falling on my head. So when this room was first opened, it wasn't very well weatherproofed and the rain was coming in. Welcome to the WTO, so the World Meteorological Organization session in collaboration with WTO on unlocking the economic potential of the weather enterprise. What I'm going to do in the couple of minutes that follow is give you some words of introduction to set the scene and to introduce our panel. So let me crack on straight into the context and introduction. And I'm going to take you back to 1817 and David Ricardo, a peer of William Wordsworth. In that year, he published his theory of comparative advantage, and his work looked at trade between two countries, Portugal and England, in two goods, wine and wool. And his insight was to show that differences in labor productivity meant that both countries were better off through trade, even though Portugal was a more efficient producer of both wine and cloth. Now, Ricardo's insight about the gains from trade still holds true. We're all better off as a result of trade, but the maths underpinning his model are changing. And one reason is the changing climate. Wine remains a mainstay of the Portuguese agricultural economy, but its viticulture sector is increasingly at risk of extreme weather events like high temperatures, floods, and wildfires. And the long-term outlook of wineries in a plus 1.5 degrees centigrade world is uncertain. Indeed, that plus 1.5 centigrade world may be fast upon us. In July, the World Meteorological Organization reported that there was a high likelihood that the global average annual temperature will reach more than 1.5 degrees above pre-industrial levels for an entire year between 2023 and 2027. The reason? El Nino conditions in the Pacific, and this will combine with human-induced climate change to turn up the heat. I hope this introduction gives you a flavor of what we'll discuss and three key points from a trade perspective that I'd like to raise and that we'll try and look at in a bit more detail in the panel, include these ones. So the first one I think is something that we take for granted. It's that the difference in climate conditions between nations is one of the factors that motivates trade, whether it be drinking a glass of wine or investing in renewable energy. Climate influences trade dynamics and trade flows. A second point that to make is that the changing climate will upend those trade patterns. Going back to Ricardo, I think he'd be surprised to learn that England is now a wine producer, 12 million bottles last year indeed. During this panel, we'll not only talk about goods trade, but we'll also talk about services, things like architectural services, insurance, and meteorological services. And the third point is climate volatility. Extreme weather is an increasingly frequent phenomenon with profound implications for trade infrastructure and disruptive impacts on trade and economic flows. And running through these 3 points is the role of meteorological and climate services, hence the title of the World Meteorological Session today, Unlocking the Economic Potential of the Weather Enterprise. And it's my honor and pleasure to moderate this session today. The term weather enterprise perhaps needs a little bit of an introduction. It refers to a global value chain of activities in which the public, private, and academic sectors are engaged. and together they ensure accurate, reliable, and timely weather and climate-related information. And indeed, there's a growing volume of weather and climate data being collected, and increasing demand for these services across a wide spectrum of economic actors. One challenge, and I think it's also an opportunity, is converting this data into tailored services. Services that will support more effective climate mitigation and adaptation measures, and of course, services that can be traded across borders. Now, we're very lucky that the World Meteorological Organization has assembled a highly distinguished panel for this session. So let me introduce them. Joining with me to my far right is Roberta Boscola. Roberta is the scientific officer at the World Meteorological Organization, where she is leading efforts in implementing climate services for the energy sector, especially in developing countries. To my far left is Dr. Robin Kopke, and Robin is an economist who joined the International Monetary Fund in 2016 and is working for the Strategy, Policy and Review departments, and is also the Deputy Project Leader of Portwatch, about which we will be hearing more during the course of the panel. To my immediate right, Dr. Gary Lemke. Gary is Head of Project Management at Swiss Re, responsible for public sector solutions. And to my immediate left, Dr. Laura Kent. Laura joined the Institution of Mechanical Engineers in June 2020 as a Public Affairs and Policy Officer. You can find much more about their biographies and backgrounds in the online blurb for the information, but I can assure you that this panel knows their El Niños from their La Ninas. So let me now pass over to Roberta and ask her to set the scene. I gave some words of introduction to try and set the scene, but can I ask you to talk to us and explain how climate change and extreme weather patterns cause major disruption to global economies and how they should be better prepared in response to these events? Thank you, Roberta.
Thank you, Michael, and good morning, everybody. You gave a great introduction, Michael, so maybe, I may repeat some of the things that you already said, but excellent that you are definitely could be one of our scientific officers in WMO as well. But yes, just briefly say, and which I hope you already are aware of it, that climate change is intensifying because we are emitting heat-trapping gases like CO2, methane, and nitrous oxide. And those gases accumulate in the atmosphere and create this heat imbalance. Temperature is globally rising and in the atmosphere and also in the oceans. And just remind that 90% of the excess of heat is absorbed by the ocean. And we have consequences or imbalance and changes in our Earth's climate system. And we are witnesses a significant increase in extreme weather as consequence of this global warming. Events like hurricane, and we saw recently one in Libya, which was really devastating with a lot of properties, but especially lives, loss of life. Floods, again, this summer in Greece, wildfire, heat waves, and droughts. But also melting glaciers and, contributing to sea level rise, reducing the sea ice in the Arctic, in the Antarctic. And WMO is all monitoring all these climate indicators and provides a state of climate annually, on the annual basis on these climate indicators. And things are going always, say, in the negative direction so far. But again, we have a fresh memory of what happened this summer. We are still in summer, and WMO just announced that this summer was the warmest summer on record, with 2 months like July and August being the hottest month, the second hottest month on our record. The last 8 years are the warmest record, warmest year on record. And also, due to that, we have extreme events are becoming more intense, more frequent, and also they have far-reaching and cascading impacts on the global economy, with the potential disruption of the economic activities, also influencing decision-making of stakeholders, and also drive investment in various sectors. So we can say one big disruption of the economy is really the economic losses due to the damage of critical infrastructure and disruption in supply chain and extensive property chain due to these extreme weather events. Those costs associated to the damage, to recovery from the damage and rebuild the infrastructure are becoming heavier, and also divert resources from other essential investment. And for emerging economies, such a situation can lead to back in the progress of development, and for low-income countries, this can represent really extreme poverty. But other sectors that are disrupted by changing in weather patterns and changing in climate change are, for example, agriculture productivity, droughts, floods, and also changes in precipitation can lead to crop failure and food shortage. And this can, in consequence, affecting global food prices and also food security. Another sector is energy sector. Energy production and consumption is directly impacted by weather events and climate change. Extreme temperature can increase the energy consumption for heating and cooling. Especially, we are seeing a shift in energy demand from heating, winter heating, to summer cooling. And such as extreme events as hurricanes and storms can disrupt the infrastructure, and also leading to a shortage of supply and increased cost for energy. And energy is actually, a major driver of economic activity in each country. And though I don't want to go through other sectors, but maybe insurance, finance, market, we will maybe hear before, after, and transport and infrastructure are also economic sector that are impacted by weather. I stop here. I can see
Thank you, Roberta. No, that's fantastic. And I have to say, I love this graphic in the background. If it was a WTO presentation, then you just see containers going through ports. This is fantastic. It reminds me of the storms that we get in the Lac Léman when you see it lit up in the mountains. It's a wonderful background. You mentioned renewable energy. Can I come back on that? Obviously, you think about renewable energy, think of solar voltaic panels. You think about wind turbines. Well, the wind turbines only turn when the wind blows. So what can the Global Weather Enterprise offer for renewable energy?
Sure.
Thanks.
Yes, the integration of renewable energy in the global energy landscape is one of the priority solutions for climate change, actually. And but it is, as Michael said, really intertwined with weather and climate consideration. And so many renewable energy sources, such as solar and wind power, are weather dependent, and the availability of the sunlight for solar panel and wind for the turbines are directly influenced by the weather condition and the climate patterns. So the variability of weather can lead into fluctuation of energy generation, and this is affecting the stability of the power grid and the energy supply. And this related fluctuation in renewable energy generation are actually posing big challenges for the grid operators and for the utilities, because a sudden change in weather, or a cloudy day, for example, or a low wind, can lead to a drop in energy output, and thus require a backup of power, so other power sources that sometimes could be actually these polluting power sources, or storage to maintain the grid reliability. Therefore, the reason why forecasting is really important, weather forecasting is really important, is crucial, is because we can predict the renewable energy generation. And so we can help the operators and the grid operators to make a real-time adjustment for meeting the demand. Also, I can say just one thing, that data, climate data and weather data are really important also for design this new energy system, for making them more reliable in the future, to withstand future climate condition. And also it's important to understand, how much storage do we need and how much energy trading do we need with our neighbor countries, because that is part of the flexibility of the system with renewable energy, high renewable energy integration.
That's a very good point. So thinking about my own country, the UK, when the wind drops, then imports come from continental Europe of electricity. Also, something that we picked up in our trade policy reviews is countries that have have an important hydroelectric power sector. When there's drought, their fossil fuel imports increase. So, and the costs rise as well, exactly. So there are important trade effects there. Now, thank you very much, Roberta, for that overview. I think we have a much better idea of this relationship between weather, climate, and trade. Robin, can I move over to you now to try and develop this in a little bit more detail? But perhaps I think it's worth starting with an idea about why the International Monetary Fund is actually on this panel. When colleagues heard that I was inviting the IMF, they said the International Meteorological Fund, is that, or should it be the Monetary Fund? So could you talk a little bit about how your mission coincides with the risks that Roberta was talking about in terms of climate variability and extremes, and just explain why you're interested in this area, and then we'll get on also then to talk about Portwatch in a moment. Please, Robin.
Wonderful. Thank you, Michael, for the inspiring introduction up front and for the opportunity to speak here. And also many thanks to Roberta for laying out some of the economic channels from extreme weather events. I like the way you've laid it out. And you could also be an economist at the IMF. So very nice. But let me build on what Roberta said. The IMF is focused on economic and financial stability. And the reason we care about climate change is because climate change poses important threats to economic and financial stability. And of course, there are a number of channels through which the economies are affected, and Roberta has laid out some of them. But I think the context in which the impact is most acute and visible is when there is a major natural disaster. And the reason is, when a disaster hits, it often has ripple effects across the global economy. So, for example, think of a major port being forced to shut down because of a cyclone. The trade that is going to be stopped and disrupted through that port closure is going to affect supply chains in places far away from the original disaster. And that means that even if your own country may not be vulnerable to a climate extreme, you're still economically vulnerable because of the ripple effects of natural disasters. And indeed, as Roberta noted, the countries that are most vulnerable to climate extremes are low-income countries. And I would emphasize within that group, especially small island developing countries. And here I have particularly in mind the many countries in the Caribbean, in the East Asia Pacific region that are prone to cyclones, that often have less resilient infrastructure, and they also have limited resources to respond to disasters. But it's not just that. these are small economies. They're highly import dependent because they have a small local production base. So they also depend on the places where they get their imports from, and where if there are disruptions to other ports that they depend on, it can heavily impact them as well. So in short, climate change is a major threat to economic instability, both at the global macro level, but also and especially for the most vulnerable countries, especially small island developing countries.
Fantastic. You've cued wonderfully what you're going to talk about next, which is Portwatch. So you've explained the link, but now show us in practical detail what this means. Please.
Great, thank you so much. So I'm here as a representative of the Portwatch team. This is a collaboration between the IMF and Oxford University. And in short, we are building a free online platform that provides user-friendly tools for policymakers and the public to gauge the impact of natural disasters on trade and to monitor trade disruptions from space. So what do we mean by that, monitoring trade disruptions from space? We use advanced technologies and big data to get a sense of trade traffic in real time. And let me give you an intuition for the project's rationale. So I have a little animation here where we simulate trade at risk from the shutdown of the port of Shanghai. So here we're starting off. After one day, this is just a local event. But over the course of a few days and weeks, it becomes a regional event where this shutdown really is spreading through supply chains across that region. And over time, even affecting ports as far away as North America or Europe in terms of disrupting trade flows and holding up inputs into production chains. So this is sort of the general framing for the Portwatch project. We care about the immediate impact of a disaster, but we also care about the ripple effects across the globe. And so with the Portwatch platform, we are providing 3 layers of analysis. The first one is about monitoring. This looks at the immediate impact after a disaster happens in terms of the economy affected and the disruption to trade flows. And here we're providing real-time trade estimates, daily trade estimates for the ports in the epicenter area of the disaster. The second layer looks at spillover analysis and asks what are going to be the indirect spillover effects to other countries that trade with ports in the disaster area. This layer can also be used for hypothetical disruptions. So let's say you assume that some disaster will hit a port in a particular area. What would be the ripple effects of such a hypothetical event? And then the third layer looks at scenario analysis and takes a long-term perspective in terms of climate paths and how different climate conditions would affect the intensity of future disasters. So let me give you a quick look behind the curtain of the platform that we're building. We're in the last few months of putting together this free online platform, and it is going to have an ability to look at the port level of 1,400 ports worldwide. We're tracking 120,000 ships worldwide in terms of trade flows. It has a spillover simulator for to analyze the spillovers I mentioned, and it has a layer for climate scenario analysis. What you see on this globe is some of the ports highlighted in orange and choke points such as canals and straits that can also be analyzed. So the portal is going to go live in November, in 2 months, and will be available at imf.org/portwatch. Thank you very much for the opportunity to lay this out.
Thanks very much, Robin. So if you were trying to apply this at the moment, you could track the impact of Hurricane Lee approaching the New England ports and look at this in real time. So we're 6 hours out, I think, from this Category 1 hurricane hitting those ports, and you'll be able to track in real time what the impact is going to be. And that's not just going to affect the US ports, it's going to affect the Atlantic ports, both sides of the Atlantic, and potentially extend further out. So this is really something that has practical, immediate usage. Thanks very much for setting all of that out. Now, Gary, I have job offers from the IMF and from the World Meteorological Organization, but perhaps you want to do something different, which is give me a job selling insurance, because I think insurance plays an essential role in buffering households and businesses against the vagaries of weather. And it's really something I think we take for granted in developed countries. But there's this insurance protection gap, maybe a little less serious in developed countries, but far bigger when you're talking to when you're thinking about developing countries. So from the perspective of the insurance sector, what risks do you see arising from climate and extreme weather? And how does this insurance protection gap kind of fit into this analysis and your ability to buffer against risk? Obviously, there's a lot to get through in there and only 3 minutes to do it, but if you could try and do your best. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and good morning also from my side. And I'm the first one now receiving a time warning here, right? No, I think you guys have teeing it up very, very nicely. I mean, and to Robin's point, I think supply chain visibility is a term we use in our industry because it's absolutely a massive problem to look at, and a lot of these tools and applications are actually in progress of being developed. I like to shed a little bit of light on this term insurance protection gap, which is now really widely used, I mean, throughout the industry. And what is this protection gap? The protection gap is fundamentally the difference between the insured and the uninsured losses. So if something major happens and which is not insured or there's no other assets to protect it, it's ultimately falling back to society. That's ultimately the cost which everybody has to cope with, be it, and ultimately it's us, it's you, it's me as a taxpayer to have to bring up these funds to support. And the numbers are absolutely mind-blowing. And just to quote a few of those for the record, I mean, the Swiss Re Institute in the latest Sigma study, we published that in the year 2022, the insurance protection gap is estimated to be $1.8 trillion of insurance premium equivalent. This is 20% up from 2018, where this was $1.5 trillion. It's estimated that around 43% of global assets are unprotected, have no insurance. And what's even more mind-blowing, that links really to those developing countries, is that it's about 60% of the global insurable crop exposure is actually uninsured. So 60% of the global food supply is fundamentally without any sort of protection. And that gives you a bit of an idea about what it actually means when we speak about insurance protection gap. It's not just someone not having car insurance. It's really a global major phenomena trying to reduce that gap, which is opening and still increasingly widening between these assets which are insured and which are actually not insured.
Wonderful. Thank you for that. So Robin mentioned the impact on small island and developing states. I had the pleasure of being in Tonga, and actually we have a trainee from Tonga with us, Estelina, and I'll ask you to give us your thoughts and takeaways towards the end of the program. But I had the pleasure, in inverted commas, of being in Tonga in the aftermath of a tropical cyclone, and there saw the impact and on businesses that you wouldn't necessarily assume. So they're walking down a street and seeing boarded up businesses for bicycle hire, for dentists, gone out of business, no insurance, nothing to be, no financial buffer to be able to replace and to be able to build up their capital equipment in the aftermath of the storm. Obviously, the insurance pools within developing countries may be a little bit smaller, and their ability to cover some of the risks, even though the coverage of insurance is more narrow. Now, you work for Swiss Re, the Re standing for reinsurance. Can you explain the role that the reinsurance plays in managing country-based risks? I guess all of this audience will understand the role that insurance plays, but what role does reinsurance play? And then can you perhaps sort of discuss whether maybe some jurisdictions, because of climate change and because of their exposure to extreme weather, are becoming uninsurable? Thank you.
Oh, that's okay. 3 minutes. No, I mean, ultimately I mean, simply reinsurance, I mean, the very simply term, I mean, we insure insurance companies, right? And the fact simply is why is that we truly try to pool risks globally, but there ultimately is enough capacity to help areas like you just mentioned, for example, like in the Caribbean, there's the CRIF, the Caribbean Catastrophe Insurance Fund. I mean, where a lot of these Caribbean islands basically are coming together, I mean, seeking protection, and with the reinsurance organization in place, I mean, it's just enough funds and money made available to support in a meaningful fashion. But let me do a step back. I mean, what is reinsurance actually doing? And even if it's reinsurance, can be very, very small scale risk coverages to very, very large and sizable ones going into the billions of capacity provided. But fundamentally, I mean, our job is to take out risk, volatility, and uncertainty, though we provide these insureds, if you will, a little bit of a sleep easy cut of coverage, right? It's much easier for them to manage the risk, to have financial stability, which ultimately also translates into political stability, being able to transfer a lot of these risks. A component which is often underestimated is it's not just the risk transfer and offering a protection for something to happen. It's also that insurance enables investments. I mean, there is examples like a Nepal, I mean, hydropower plant, which without insurance coverage, I mean, international investors and donors would not have been willing to invest because it's just too risky to do so. So the role of insurance to de-risking investments becomes an increasingly important role for our industry to play. And it becomes particularly important when we talk a little later in this session about adaptation and mitigation measures. To mobilize funds and investments, to be investment in adaptation measures, requires a certain level of de-risking, which is what the industry provides. Now, your last point, speaking about, I mean, the insurability, one very interesting effect, which also been provided by the insurance and reinsurance industry, is in order to provide insurance protection, you have to do a risk assessment done. The risk is ultimately, and you were alluding to it, is something like the frequency of something to happen times severity of that thing, what just happened. So now if you apply adaptation measures, you bring down the risk, and this bringing down the risk translates directly into the insurance premium you have to pay for that. You could basically say the insurance premium and or the expected loss of something to happen is kind of like a direct measure of the riskiness of certain areas. So if you analyze an area and see the risk is very high also from the terms of insurance premium, and you were considering measurements to bring down the risk by means of adaptation measures, you can directly compare the economic benefit of these adaptation measures to the insurance premiums, and this way balance out, I mean, at which point you get more economic benefit from investing into adaptation measures as opposed to investing into risk transfer mechanisms. So in that sense, I mean, insurance is also a very helpful yardstick, so to speak, looking into the riskiness of certain countries and weathers and other types of risks.
Thanks very much. That point on de-risking was one that, yeah, particularly, stands out for me. I hadn't thought of that, and it makes a very nice segue into the question I'm going to ask to Dr. Laura Kent, who is one of the authors of this report, which is Adapting Industry to Withstand Rising Temperatures and Future Heat Waves. And the report looks at the ability of infrastructure, our existing infrastructure, to extend existing weather extremes, putting it in the context of what you've just said, and that de-risking of the hydropower in investments in Nepal. Obviously, there's an architectural services dimension to that, in as much as when you're laying out, starting the plans, then you want to be factoring in that climate variability, that extreme temperatures, etc., actually into the designs at the design stage. But with all the existing capital infrastructure that we haven't necessarily thought of, when they were first designed, we haven't necessarily plan for those variations. Did you want to comment and maybe introduce this report from an engineering perspective?
Yeah, absolutely. And thank you for having me here today. Just to answer that point, I think one of the big issues we face as engineers in the engineering community is that a lot of design codes and standards are based on historical climate data. They don't necessarily look at what is going to happen throughout the lifetime. So I have an asset, I build a building, but I base those design principles on the climate that we've had 10, 15 years ago, not necessarily I want this building to last for 20, 30 years. So what will the temperatures look like in 30 years? And let's prepare for that. And that's a long process to get to that point. It takes a long time to adapt existing standards. So standards are built on a common consensus model. So to get lots of buy-in, it takes a lot of process to develop those. But reassuringly, a lot of new standards are being developed with climate projections in mind. So we're thinking the CEN have developed a guide on how to introduce climate adaptation principles into standards writing, and there's ASHRAE, also the Standards Council of Canada have a very great guide published a couple of years ago looking at how design codes can be adapted and what principles they need. What importantly, they include the data sets and case studies of how it's important and why it's important to adapt. I think, so yeah, the data for climate projections is out there. Well, we don't deny that, but the making it accessible and easy for standards writers to incorporate, and people who design buildings need to have that easily accessible. And I think in terms of why industry in particular as a sector really need to focus on this, it comes out, I'm going to take the process industries as an example, if that's okay. So the process industries undermine our economies worldwide. And they cover things like pharmaceuticals, oil and gas, mining, huge bits of industry that really economies rely on. And often these industries use temperature processes that rely on very good control of temperature. So we're thinking evaporation, distillation, sterilization, all of those processes. And as the temperatures start to rise, that control becomes harder. We also see the breakdown of refrigeration, cooling, it's not working as well. So during some of the heat waves, we've seen supermarkets struggle to keep the refrigerators at the temperatures. So then you're thinking about food waste as well. And it's not just the industries themselves. So the processes struggle, the mechanical assets start to struggle in intense heat. The buildings themselves just aren't designed for heat. They're big, vast rooms with high loads. So it's once they get warm, it's really difficult to shift that heat back out. They are often grey buildings on grey sites with not many trees, so we're not getting cooling outside, and that all develops to an urban heat island, which just intensifies the problem. Then you've got to think about the people working inside of these places. So just recently, the UK have had a heat wave. It's nowhere near what some parts of the world are struggling with, but it was 30 degrees last week, which, as you know, is hot for us. And people were struggling, and you start to see people start being dehydrated and get heat stress and heat stroke. And possibly clinically, it's not just that's not great for your workers on a work scale, but actually your productivity is going to start to drop, because you're going to start to see people not working as hard, taking risks, not wearing their protective equipment properly. And I think like the economic cost there is quite often misunderstood and not represented.
It sounds like working in the WTO building in the
Yeah.
summer on this side where there's no air conditioning here and we get the sun come round on us. And it's just, it was 40 degrees. So when London, it was 30 degrees. In Geneva, it was 40 degrees. And so that, but then coming back to this issue of standards, I mean, it's not just standards in the architectural standards, it's standards for refrigeration equipment, it's standards across the board. So there is an enormous work in the standards area to update and to be integrating climate variability, extremes into those models for standards for existing and future goods and services.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think whilst work is ongoing, though, it needs a more considered effort. So yes, the standards, as you know, shape the basis of manufacture and construction. They help outline the design, production, maintenance, and got the other word, but they are built on that process of consensus and best practice, and without having the data, without embedding the data into our standards, it's hard for designers to incorporate those future projections and make it sustainable and long-term when we're designing current systems. Because I think as engineers, we don't want to be designing and building things now without consideration for actually, are they suitable? Are they going to last? Are they just going to be out of commission in a couple of years, because that's a waste of everyone's time and money? So I think that there's a lot of momentum in embedding it. It's just that data needs to be accessible and in an easy format for users to just pick up when they're designing their buildings, or assets or processes, whatever it is. It needs to be in that easy, accessible and understandable format so that what we do now is fit for the future.
Wonderful. You've teed up my next question to Roberta beautifully. Data. Now, we talked about the insurance protection gap. Is there a meteorological services gap? So in what Laura's talking about in terms of data, the availability of that data, obviously there's, I guess, some differential between the ability of national hydrological and meteorological organizations in OECD countries versus the rest of the world. Could you talk about that and how, and making the data available? If you are not able to collect it, then how can you use it? And, you know, it has to cross borders for you to be able to use it. So could you talk a little bit about that, this point that Laura is making in terms of making that data available?
Yeah, absolutely. Yes, I think, you know, you made the comparison with insurance gap and meteorological gap. So maybe this is important that, you know, the meteorological gap can be understood as a gap between the availability of meteorological data and services and the comprehensive utilization. I think what, you know, Laura really explained very well this, you know, like to be able to access those data and to utilize your data in your decision-making process, which has to be simplified on the complexity of the data and the science. So gap exists, I think, in terms of limited sometimes data access, especially in some region with low income and developing countries. Many countries in the world don't have access to high quality meteorological data and forecasting services. And this can lead to a lack of preparedness and response to action to be prepared and to response action to natural hazards. Second, I think a gap could be in infrastructure and services. Those are not equally distributed in all the countries. We have some very advanced countries in terms of monitoring and forecasting capability, but others, they have very low capability, and this is a lack of they lack really basic of meteorological infrastructure. And the other issue is, again, even if when data and services are available, the utilization of this information is suboptimal because of the complexity of the information and the difficulty of integrating this information in the decision-making process, as I mentioned before. So we know we need to do a better job, I think, in the World Meteorological Organization and the weather enterprise to really translate the climate science and the long-term projection into actionable information for business and government. And if I have a little bit of more time, I would like to say something about what WMO is doing to really fill this gap. So we have several initiatives, and I don't have the time to go into detail to all of them. But one is the Systematic Observation and Financing Facility, SOF, which is promoting investment in meteorological infrastructure, and especially to support countries to close the gap for weather and climate observations. We have satellite technology and data sharing policies and technology to expand the coverage of the data and data quality, and especially in underserved regions. And also the WMO information system is now more advanced and help to share all the data at the of international and regional national data in a more simple way, and also more inexpensive. We do have a unified data policy to strengthen the weather and climate services, and also to meet the growing demand of a weather and climate product. And we also have an initiative called Early Warning for All, which was launched by UN Secretary General in 2022. And it is to ensure that everybody is protected by hazardous weather and water and climate events. We have the Global Framework for Climate Services, again, already started in 2029, but is a framework to better manage the risk of climate variability and change, and really a support to climate adaptation. And also we have activities for capacity building, training, education, and we also have a public and private partnership to really push for innovative solution to better data access. I think with with these tools and the culture of collaboration and data openness, I think WMO is aiming to really ensure that accurate weather and climate information is readily available and to be used for decision-making across boards and the regions.
You also have the coolest video graphics. It's absolutely, they're fantastic. They're mesmerizing. If you're not listening, I mean, the information that you're giving is fabulous, but the video graphics behind, they're just wonderful.
Thanks so much to the team.
They're really great. In the interest of time, I'm going to skip on to Robin now and to ask you a similar question about the data gaps on the economic side, and ask you to give us an idea of what you're doing to provide timely economic data in the context of climate extremes at the IMF. Thank you.
Thank you, Michael. So actually, the economic data gap was at the origin of the Portwatch project, in that for many small countries and low-income countries, there is very limited official data in terms of macroeconomic timely estimates. And that applies across the board in terms of national accounts, balance of payments. It also applies to trade statistics. And so one important contribution that we want to make with the Portwatch project is to make available timely trade estimates for ports around the world in essentially all countries. And so we're providing Portwatch as a public good with free access to data that is downloadable and available in a user-friendly format. That includes the daily trade statistics. It also includes information on the international trade network, the maritime trade network, in terms of port-to-port exposures and linkages. And essentially all the data that is powering the Portwatch platform will be available for download, and including with the underlying research that has established the principles that we're using.
Fantastic. Can I, Gary, ask you, you mentioned the insurance protection gap. And there we have there's a conundrum there, isn't it? In terms of, we have expanding risk from climate and meteorological events, and we have this widening gap. In a sense that then, and also this issue of data where there's a lot of holes in the data. The data sets are not brilliant, particularly for developing countries, the ones that have the biggest insurance protection gap. Yeah, without being too pessimistic, is there a way to square this circle? What more can we do to try and reduce to maximize the impact that insurance can have in terms of buffering those risks?
Yeah, I think a few we talked already about. I mean, there's two things. I mean, it's really the holistic risk assessment, right? It's what we discussed already, that sometimes you feel you're not impacted, but you are, because there's knock-on and ripple effects, right? I think the port is a brilliant example here. But now I really like to disappoint some of my colleagues here, because data is absolutely important. And our industry relies a lot on new data, satellite data, developing new tools and products like parametric index-based insurance products, which use directly satellite type of data and information. But data is not the single most important thing for our industry. And I said in the prep calls, sometimes data is used as an excuse. If a new product is about to start, we say, okay, we have to have more data. It's not yet enough. I mean, our industry can work with surprisingly little amount of data. Bigger challenges come often with regulation. Is certain risk transfer products allowed in a certain jurisdiction? Can we do parametric index-based insurance products in a certain jurisdiction, yes or no? Is a policy ready to account for necessary insurance premiums? Because, I mean, it might not be eligible in certain countries, not eligible in a political environment. Is also the financing secured? I realize a lot that we spend a lot of time to think about products, product development, and forget about the moment that these products need to be financed, the insurance policies need to be financed, the risk transfer products need to be financed, but also the adaptation processes need to be financed. And this is one of the biggest problems in my mind. To your point, we have to invest into adaptation mitigation processes to bring down the risks, to keep these countries and jurisdictions insurable. But at the same time, while there is so little investment into adaptation, because so far we have not managed, not as our industry, but all of us, to find ways to make adaptation processes bankable. Because only if they're really bankable, it becomes increasingly interesting for investors to invest into this instrument, and then we start a process. So absolutely, yes, data is important, and you can never have enough data, but we should not use lack of data as an excuse to not invest into these other parts I just mentioned about.
Thank you. Laura, can I turn to you? Before I do that, just quickly, I should say that after Laura's comments, I plan to open up to the floor to have 10 minutes of question and answers. So do please think about what you've been hearing, and be ready to ask some questions to our distinguished panel about this. I guess in terms of what you were just saying, Gary, about the difficulties of getting involved in adaptation. That was what you were saying. The investment in adaptation. This is where architectural services, engineering services play potentially an extremely important role. It doesn't necessarily get around the issue of the investability of these things, but it speaks to the robustness of them. But there, obviously, I guess one difficulty also in that sense is the restrictions that Gary was talking about in the way of, potential regulations being difficult. That also applies in the area of, all of the services that we're talking about. It's not that those things are necessarily freely traded. So perhaps you could just talk about some of the challenges there that the institution comes across in terms of trading of those services.
Yeah, I
Nice
can
easy
try.
question for you.
I can try. So I think when it comes to trade standards and regulations, I think they play a huge role in mitigating those risks in terms of hopefully make sure that you are considering the long-term resilience of your asset, your infrastructure, product, whatever, to future climates, and take that into account. We're seeing that being taken into account more and more, and they help make products environmentally friendly. So they embed sustainable principles. They mean that standards can be, that products can be invested in with confidence. So they play a huge role in that adaptation sphere, and I think that was a great point raised then. Just to say on that though, I do think that adaptation is an economically attractive position for businesses. I think often we say, yes, it's not investable, it's hard to convince people to invest in it. But actually, if you're thinking, I want my business to be around for 20 years or the next 100 years, you need to know that your business now is not going to look the same as it is going to look in 100 years. So if you adapt now and you build in those resiliency measures, you are protecting yourself long term. You have a well-adapted workforce, perhaps, and it starts becoming an attractive place to work as well. So when it comes to recruiting, things like that, at least for the younger generation, they're starting to take that into consideration. So I think it's an exciting opportunity rather than a scary challenge.
Thank you. Now, our audience, this is the 4th day of the public forum, but you have built-in resilience. You're still here. You come along. So please, the floor is open. What would you like to ask this distinguished panel? What did you not understand? What would you like further clarification on? What do you disagree with, or what do you agree with? Please, the floor is yours. Gentleman there.
Perfect. Thank you so much. Good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for your time. My name is Jonathan Serrano, and I'm a student from Ecuador. I grew up all my life in Ecuador, hearing about all the disasters from El Niño, all the consequences, the economical and even life losses we have here. So being here and learning that action is being made, but not any kind of action that has been happening like in the last decades, but innovative, disruptive, and technological solutions is very meaningful to go back to Ecuador. My question goes to Mr. Robin and the Portwatch initiative with the University of Oxford. Coming as undergraduate students, I'm very amazed to see that academia is already being involved. But how do you believe we can replicate the efforts with other universities, especially from developing economies, and even universities that might come and say, oh, we want to be involved, but in the background, they're having still investing in fossil fuels, in companies that do not do any good to the world. How can we bring more universities and academia? Thank you so much.
Very much, Jonathan, for that question. Anybody else like to come in and ask something or give a comment? Please.
Thank you very much. Can you hear me? Okay. Thank you for this wonderful session. It really opens up possibility to sort of like benefiting from climatology, from weather, as you can see the title, the weather enterprise. So my question is whether to Roberta, especially, whether the WMO have been also initiated with this kind of opportunities among its members. I'm from Indonesia. I'm the WTO chairs program, belong to this program. Whether you have been in communication with this kind of opportunities with the members. I know in my country, we have this body responsible for climates, for geophysics and so forth. Personally, I'm close with the head of this body, so I'll tell her what happens in this session, and probably talk about the potential economic potentials of having, especially on the data utilizations that you just mentioned earlier. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that comment and that concrete outcome as well. I think there is a question from my esteemed colleague, Ambassador Eloi, please.
Thank you, really, Michael. Je voudrais remercier et féliciter très sincèrement les membres du panel pour la qualité de leur présentation et dire aussi que l'initiative de l'organisation de cette session, nous la saluons parce que nous sommes tous concernés par le temps. Lorsque nous nous levons dans la journée, nous regardons le ciel avant de sortir. Et nous nous posons la question de savoir quel temps fera-t-il demain. Nous avons écouté d'excellentes présentations et c'est tous les secteurs de la vie économique et sociale qui sont concernés par l'entreprise météorologique. Nous en avons entendu quelques-uns, ces secteurs. Nous en citerons une multitude. Nous avons par exemple l'élevage qui est concerné. Nous avons même l'artisanat. Nous avons la santé humaine, celle des animaux et des végétaux. Et les projets, les initiatives qui sont portées par les différentes organisations impliquées dans cette session, nous souhaiterions que ces projets et ces programmes soient amplifiés et que la collaboration interinstitutionnelle, y compris avec le secteur privé, soit promue. Je dirais aussi que c'est un début et nous sommes persuadés que nous aurons des résultats amplifiés dans les jours, les mois et les années à venir. Je vous remercie une fois encore et merci à tous ceux qui ont contribué à la préparation et à la tenue de cette session. Je nommerai ceux que je connais, Michael, et Sheila et Roberta, dont les visages me sont familiers. Et merci à nos amis de la cabine d'interprétation qui ont facilité la communication et la compréhension entre nous. Merci, Michael.
Thank you very much. And one practical example of how weather forecasting influences my behavior is I open the Meteo Swiss app every morning. I look at the radar and then depending on what it shows, I take my bicycle or I take my car. So I'm a fair weather cyclist, and my apologies for the greenhouse gas emissions which result from the rainy forecast. So I'm going to take two very quick questions and then we're going to stop. So the gentleman there and the lady.
Absolutely. Thank you very much for having us. It's an absolute honor to be in front of all of you, and it's very illuminating to get to hear from all of you. Likewise, my name is Diego Garcia. I am a Bolivian national, and I currently study at Northeastern University in Boston, Massachusetts. Like my friend Jonathan, we're here representing Northeastern University, and I'm currently working with the Institute of Economics and Peace in order to encourage peace building in the world. My question, very, very briefly, essentially had to do with how important is economic resilience and how important are partnerships within least developed nations, as would be my own home country, Bolivia, in order to increase the effectiveness of these efforts in the future. Thank you very much.
Thank you. And my colleague Claire, please.
Good morning. Great pleasure to attend this session. My name is Claire. I'm from the Economic Research and Stats Division. So I was the technical approval for the space-based AIS data survey verification procedure at the Canadian Space Agency. And I was responsible for collecting, managing, and verify the satellite data and support the initiative of applying AI technique to analyze AIS with satellite image in order to improve the maritime risk. My question, I have seen a lot of challenging and risk to use weather data to predict our uncertainty world. My first question is regarding the data collection and the quality. As we know, the weather forecasting relies heavily on the accuracy and timely weather data source. So obtaining the high quality data is very crucial for the AI training purpose to obtaining the accuracy result for decision making. And when it comes to the national advancement, it's not very capable with the international inclusion that may lead to lack of the transparency about the data and also the quality of data. In terms of the weather enterprise, how can we ensure the quality and availability of the space weather data, especially in the remote and underdeveloped political sensitive region in the weather enterprise? And I actually have 4 questions. I'm not sure. Okay, that would be perfect. Thank you.
Wanted to react quickly to something.
Yeah, just generally, because I think that after that it will get quite technical. No, I wanted to address the point of the collaboration, and that's also what we represent here at Swiss Re. We have this unit of public sector solutions, which is all about public-private partnerships, which absolutely fundamental. This team is really dedicated to work with the public space, the ministries of finance, the sovereigns, sub-sovereigns, municipalities, and link them and their needs with the commercial sector. And that is also represented in a lot of the collaborations our industry tries to put forward, like with the IDF, the Insurance Development Forum, working a lot with the development banks, the ADBs, the KfWs, the World Bank, to help facilitate these tasks, but also working a lot with industry specialists directly, right? I mean, companies like ISI, Planet, really looking also with the World Meteorological Organization, because again, we are dependent on the data, but not only. But the point I wanted to make is, and which also so important these type of panels, is to have a public-private partnership established. We have to have this collaboration from very, very local, very, very granular, up to all the way to the big global organizations. And now I let the colleagues respond to the technical questions.
Maybe then what we will do in your responses, if I could also ask you to maybe just elaborate a little bit further in terms of sort of a closing remark that you would like to make, in addition to any to the responses to that comment. And I guess that could be along the lines of, and we've obviously talked about the weather enterprise, Roberta, so they're thinking about, how looking out it's going to contribute to climate resilience. So if I could ask you to pick up those questions and maybe finish with that final thought, that would be great.
I think also addressing the quality of the data and the data collection, and to ensure, and I think I go back to actually what Gary said before, is a close collaboration with all the elements of this weather enterprise, which are the national meteorological and hydrological services, in each countries, these agencies that are responsible for collecting data and analyzing. They do have a procedure, they do have protocols to ensure the data quality. International organizations like WMO, they set standards and promote cooperation all among the countries. University and research organizations are crucial, really, because they are fundamental for the climate science, to understand the climate science and contribute to the advancement of an innovation of the forecasting. And also private companies that are, part, that are part of this enterprise. They do research, critical research, and they also contribute to the advancement of innovation and forecasting. And I think this is important together with advancement in technology, that all these elements come together to collaborate and to provide a better service. I think this is my remarks.
Fantastic. Thank you for that. I'm going to hand over to Robin. There are a couple of specific questions that obviously were directed to you. In addition to us answering those, could I perhaps ask you to pick up what IMF has in terms of any further activities that you're thinking that are going to be that are in the works that can promote resilience and preparedness that are relevant to what we've been talking about? Thank you.
Very good, thank you. So let me address a couple of questions that were posed by the gentleman in front of me. So regarding collaboration with universities, I think it's an excellent question. And let me give you as an example, the way our Portwatch project started was that two of our team members met at a conference where I think one of them was presenting, or maybe both were presenting separately. And it just started from, in an informal meeting and a common interest in similar research. And I think what's been driving our team forward is a real passion to work in this area and make a contribution. And I think many people in academia and in the public sector, also of course in the private sector, have that passion to work hard and make a contribution. And I think to bring about more collaboration with universities, it takes just some initiative, I think, on both sides, on the academic side, on the side of counterparts in the official or private sector, and try to make use of ideas and research that has already been developed and try to operationalize it and make it useful for others. I think that's an excellent path that can really make a difference in today's world. Regarding the question on economic resilience and partnerships in the context of Bolivia, and it applies to many other countries, I think it's very important to try to get expertise into the country, also in terms of learning from peers, learning from other countries. And one way we do that at the IMF is to provide technical assistance, which is transferring specialized expertise in terms of governance, in terms of policies that are implemented. And I think that also ties in with Michael's question on the IMF's broader efforts in terms of the climate agenda. So I think our what we call capacity development function, which is providing technical assistance, also has been ramped up significantly in the last several years. And one part or one context in which that has been done is our so-called resilience and sustainability facility, which is a lending instrument, a new lending instrument that promotes policies that help with climate change in terms of mitigation, adaptation, and transition. So let me stop here.
Thank you very much, Robin. Now, Laura's fantastic report from the Institute of Mechanical Engineers, I read that I picked that up in an article in the Financial Times, which led me through a link to this wonderful publication. So, Laura, what am I going to read that you've written in the Financial Times in the coming months and years?
Oh gosh, that's I don't want to promise anything, but can I just pick up on one point? So I'm from the Institution of Mechanical Engineers. A huge part of what we do is making sure engineers both current and newly trained engineers have access to training and opportunities to learn how to embed sustainable design principles, embed adaptation processes, circular economy principles into their work. So a lot of what we do as an institution actually is supporting engineers to learn that, not just engineers, wider community as well, and making sure that they're ready for the challenges to come. And yeah, a lot of this is a collaborative effort. So this report in particular looked at what we as an institution can do, what we think policymakers can do, the engineering community and also industry as a whole. So, but it requires all of those actors working together. We've obviously over the summer been really actively involved in promoting different parts of this report and the wider impacts of these. We've also just last week had a really fantastic conference workshop that brought together people from across the world to look at solutions on adaptation and resilience, not just to heat and drought, but to rising sea levels and pluvial and fluvial flooding. So, almost got the third one. And that was a fantastic opportunity. We brought together policymakers with researchers from academia and with industry to have that conversation about what is it we need to do, what's working, what's not working, and what are the gaps. So we're doing a lot. We're committed to staying involved in this conversation.
Wonderful. I look forward to learning much more about it. Gary, you wanted to just add something quickly before I hand over to Estelina to give us a sort of the view of a Ministry of Tonga official who's with us for a year to get her takeaways from this panel. So Gary, please.
No, I just want to express a wish, right? Because I think it should be really nice outcome also of this session is that not only to say that there is impact like 1.5 degrees or these harbors are going to be affected, but invest time and effort to quantify in economic terms what this impact is going to look like. Because that's really something that's missing also for people and business people, the private sector to relate to this, right? If I tell you it's going to be 1.5 degrees warmer, you're going to have more storms, higher water. What does it mean to me economically? It's sad to say, but only if you express this in economic terms, when people, you get a totally different level of attention and willingness to do something about it. It's incredibly difficult to do. Yes, that's why it's not done to the extent necessary today. Though my wish to all these very smart brains in the room and these organizations, invest and help to translate that what's going to happen in what this is going to mean in terms of economic outcome. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Estelina, would you like to give us some takeaways, please?
Thank you. As a small island developing state and a vulnerable economy, inclusive and sustainable trade is critical for our country, for economic development and for growth. Yet we find ourselves at the front line of exposure to extensional threats of climate change and natural disasters. And from this session, I draw important key takeaways. Firstly is predictability. In light of challenges that we face and increasing occurrences of extreme weather and climate water events, supply chains are disrupted. But in looking at initiatives such as the Portwatch initiative and adoption, it looks at monitoring and providing simulations for the disruption of maritime trade flows. As a Pacific island nation, most of our trade is through maritime, and having this sort of accessibility to this sort of information in real time will actually be beneficial in having to know the ripple effects of this disruptions, and also will help us in our role in our resilience efforts. Not only that, but in looking at access to data for services. It was mentioned access to high quality data infrastructure can be a problem, especially from a small island nation, and not having access to good infrastructure meteorological wise in terms of of interpreting and accessing this information can be crucial for us, especially when having to know in advance what is to happen, and having this sort of information across, making it accessible cross-border, and also having built the capacity for our people would also be helpful for our economies, and it will also save livelihoods, and in turn build resilient economies. And lastly, investing in mitigation and adaptation measures. It also looking at de-risking, looking at especially our sensitive sectors, which are agriculture, especially tourism and maritime. When especially having seen that 60% of global crops are without protection, this is very important to us because agriculture is our lifeline and one of our key sectors. But having drawn from the presentations, it's important that as a small economy, as a vulnerable state, investing in mitigation measures and is something that we should be able to look towards in having to address issues of climate change and weather events. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Roberta. Our time is, oh, sorry, Estelina. Yes, I was thinking that I was going to thank you next. Sorry, my mind jumped on ahead. Thank you, Estelina. So that brings us, I think, to almost to a close. So my thanks to Roberta, to Gary, Laura, and Robin for their fantastic presentations and willingness to engage on this topic. I think clearly there's a lot more that WMO and WTO can do together, in more than just sharing each other's cafeterias. You have the better view, I might add. So let me close with a thought on a value chain which is foremost in Estelina's mind and my own mind at the moment, which is rugby. A lot of you probably know that the Rugby World Cup is ongoing at the moment, and Estelina is from Tonga, and Tonga is playing Ireland on Saturday. So we asked Shayla from WMO, what is going to be the weather on Saturday night? And I'm going to give the last word to the weather girls at the WMO. And I'm not sure that this is meteorologically that correct, but she sang back to me, it's raining men, hallelujah, it's raining men. There's 15 men who will be battling out on a rugby match. So with that thought, it's not all doom and gloom. There's plenty of applications of the weather enterprise, in addition to obviously building in resilience and to climate change. So thank you all for being here. Thanks for the panels, and look forward to continuing the conversation. Thank you.
And thanks, Michael, for your great moderation and singing as well.